What if I told you that Pinklon Thomas fought Evander Holyfield after suffering a stroke? That's it, he's stopping it. Angelo is stopping it. About Angelo, Dundee said to the referee, "That is it, we don't want any more." Or that he was literally high when he won the heavyweight title. Everyone knows his name, and if you're old enough, you remember his famous wars with Tyson and other legends. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Pinky Thomas. Who punches harder, Pinky? Who got the best left hand? Pinky, he's gonna get licked. But what about his downfall, the controversy, and the life he's living today? Not so familiar then. Let's take a look at what's now become of this once formidable boxer. I had the fastest hands and the fastest feet, and there was no way I was going to ever be beat. The boxing world saw the pink trunks and the powerful left jab, but they never saw the real fight happening outside the ring while he traded punches with champions. A much deadlier opponent lurked in his corner, one that would nearly destroy him. Would you believe a 12-year-old kid shooting heroin would one day wear the heavyweight championship belt? Because that's exactly where our story begins. Before Pink Panther Thomas became famous, he was just another kid from Pontiac, Michigan. But here's what makes his story so tragic. Thomas wasn't some street kid with no options. He had a stable, middle-class family where values were taught, and parents worked hard. No broken home, no tragic backstory, no system to blame. So how does a kid with a decent life fall into such a dark path? By making every wrong decision possible. By 14, he wasn't just experimenting. He was hooked. Not the kind of addict who dabbles on weekends. The kind who wakes up needing a fix more than food. The kind who will do anything to avoid the sickness that kicks in when the high wears off, and I mean anything. Serious robberies, violent crimes. Thomas didn't just lose his childhood to heroin. He burned it to the ground. Think about that for a second. A teenager so addicted, so desperate for drugs, that he began robbing the same folks who'd watched him grow up. His own neighborhood became his hunting ground and his prison. There were people in high places who wanted me dead. He later admitted this wasn't teenage rebellion. This was life and death. While other kids worried about homework and high school crushes, Thomas was hiding behind buildings, ducking old friends, and avoiding drug dealers who wanted him gone. Law enforcement even kept files on him. And the worst part, none of it was enough. The heroin kept its grip on him, always demanding more money, more crime, more risk. The chaos of his teenage years created a reality where survival itself became his full-time job. What's particularly striking about his early years is the difference compared to most champions. While future rivals were learning to throw proper jabs, Thomas was figuring out how to avoid jail time. He was learning escape routes, not footwork. Boxing didn't find him until much later. In fact, it wasn't even his idea. When addiction and a criminal record closed most paths in life, boxing appeared as an unlikely salvation. Most fighters come from rough beginnings, poverty, broken homes, a system stacked against them. Thomas had none of that. There was no environmental excuse, no tragic backstory that forced him into addiction. Just bad decisions made over and over again, until there was almost no way out. That's what makes his story both tragic and inspiring. Because somehow, despite everything, he found a way to rise. But make no mistake, those early years of addiction cast a shadow over his career. Even as he climbed the heavyweight ranks, his demons never left. The opponents in the ring were dangerous. Sure, they left bruises, but the battle happening outside of it, it left scars that would never fully heal. That fight was far deadlier. The same hands that once tied off veins would eventually be raised in victory as heavyweight champion of the world. Think about this contradiction for a moment. Pinklon Thomas wasn't fighting clean in any sense of the word. Not outside the ring and often not even inside it. And yet by 1984 his unblemished 24-0-1 record had earned him a shot at the heavyweight title. A title shot no one saw coming. while chaos and addiction ruled his life. Outside the ring between the ropes, the noise quieted, even with drugs still coursing through his veins. The boxing ring became his sanctuary. The squared circle gave him something he never had anywhere else: purpose, direction, and for brief moments peace. It didn't make sense, but nothing about Thomas's rise did. Most champions pay their dues in the amateurs, sharpening their craft over dozens, sometimes hundreds of fights. Before going pro, Thomas, he had 3. That's like trying to perform brain surgery after a weekend seminar. By the time he turned pro in 1978, expectations were let's be honest, non-existent. He was a boxing novice swimming with sharks. No one understood it, but fight after fight, Thomas kept winning, piecing together an undefeated streak that forced the boxing world to take notice. His rise through the ranks literally defied probability. Even as he climbed the heavyweight ranks, he was often training high, sometimes even stepping into the ring with heroin still in his system. Those pink trunks became his signature, a flashy distraction. While commentators talked about his unique ring attire, they missed the glassy eyes, the erratic behavior, the moments where he seemed lost between rounds. His secret remained hidden behind a powerful left jab. It was crisp, commanding, and allowed him to control distance and hide from his opponents. By August 1984, Thomas had compiled a 24-0-1 record. The boxing establishment couldn't ignore him anymore, though many insiders still doubted him. And yet, when the opportunity came, Thomas did what he always did. He defied the odds. Tim Witherspoon stood across from him for the WBC Heavyweight Championship, and it wasn't pretty. 12 grueling rounds later, the man who had no business being in that ring had his hand raised. Pinklon Thomas was the heavyweight champion of the world, and he was still hiding a secret that could have destroyed him. His first title defense against former champion Mike Weaver in June 1985 showed Thomas at his absolute peak. His left jab controlled the action until in the 8th, Thomas unleashed a perfectly timed punch that dropped Weaver. The victory silenced the doubters. The critics who questioned his legitimacy had no choice but to acknowledge the truth. Pinky Thomas wasn't just a champion. He was one of the best heavyweights of his era. Boxing analysts praised his technical skills and composure, never knowing that the man they were analyzing was fighting a far more dangerous opponent than anyone he faced in the ring. For a fleeting moment in boxing history, Thomas stood atop the heavyweight division. But each defense of his title wasn't merely against an opponent. It was a battle against an addiction that continued to consume him outside the spotlight, and soon, the double life he had carefully constructed was about to come crashing down. While the betting odds heavily favored him to retain his title against Trevor Burbeck, those closest to the champion knew a devastating secret. The man defending the most prestigious title in sports couldn't even focus long enough to prepare for the fight. Instead, he was pouring his energy into a bizarre side hustle that left boxing insiders scratching their heads. Wanna take a guess? It was selling homemade music cassettes for $5 a pop. You heard that right. While Burbeck was preparing to take his title, Thomas was out hustling like a struggling artist. If that doesn't tell you where his head was, nothing will. His priorities were crumbling, and so was his career. The chaos didn't stop at the musical detour. The corner of a championship fighter is sacred territory. It's the one place where everything is supposed to make sense. But when Thomas stepped into the ring against Burek in 1986, his legendary trainer, Angelo Dundee, the man who had guided Muhammad Ali to greatness, was nowhere to be found. Their relationship had deteriorated so severely that Dundee, one of boxing's most loyal corner men, couldn't stand beside his fighter during what should have been a defining moment. And just like that, the champion walked into the biggest fight of his life, completely alone. The money that should have secured Pinklon Thomas's future became the fuel for his downfall. With cash flowing in, his cocaine habit exploded. No limits, no restraint. Just pure full-blown addiction. Training became an afterthought. On fight night, fans watched in confusion. The disciplined, technically sound fighter was gone, replaced by a distracted, unprepared shadow. Thomas moved sluggishly, disconnected, like a fighter trapped inside his own body. Burbeck saw the weakness and went to work. 12 rounds later, the title was gone, and with it Thomas's place among boxing's elite. To his credit, he didn't disappear. He rallied for 3 consecutive victories, rebuilding enough of his reputation to earn a shot at the sport's terrifying new force iron Mike Tyson. It was 1987, and Tyson was cutting through the heavyweight division like a buzzsaw. But just when he needed to be at his absolute best, disaster struck. An old shoulder injury flared up, leaving him barely able to throw his right hand. Angelo Dundee, who had returned to Thomas's corner, begged him to cancel. Angelo wanted to cancel the Tyson fight because of my shoulder, Thomas later revealed. But desperation makes men reckless. He knew the big paydays were running out. I might not get another opportunity, he reasoned. So, against the most destructive heavyweight of his generation, he stepped into the ring with essentially one arm. The result was both predictable and remarkable. Tyson came in like a wrecking ball, knocking Thomas down for the first time in his career. He staggered under the impact, but refused to stay down yet. In a display of heart that would later earn Tyson's respect, Thomas finished on his feet. But while his refusal to quit showed remarkable courage, what happened in the aftermath revealed something far more disturbing. For 3 days after the Tyson fight, Thomas vanished, not just from boxing, from reality itself, a cocaine-fueled disappearance, so severe that he had no memory of where he was or what he did. This was addiction in its most dangerous form, a man actively erasing himself. But the truly unthinkable was still to come. In 1988, as he prepared for his bout against rising star Evander Holyfield, Thomas suffered a stroke. For any athlete, this would mean immediate medical attention and retirement discussions. But for Thomas, it meant something entirely different. Deception in what can only be described as one of boxing's most dangerous. Cover UPS Thomas made the decision to hide his stroke from boxing. Authorities, a man with confirmed brain damage, deliberately stepped into the ring with one of boxing's strongest, most relentless warriors. This wasn't bravery, it was suicide. Medical experts agree. Boxing after a stroke is like walking blindfolded through a minefield. The elevated blood pressure, head trauma, any of these could have triggered hemorrhaging, seizures, or worse, death. Thomas wasn't just risking his career, he was gambling with his life. And when he stepped into the ring against Evander Holyfield, it played out exactly as you'd expect. The skilled boxer, who once wore the heavyweight crown, had vanished. In his place stood a compromised shell, moving sluggishly, as Holyfield dismantled him over 7 brutal rounds. The man, who once stood toe-to-toe with the best in the world, couldn't even mount a competitive effort. It was hard to watch, and for Angelo Dundee, the man who had once guided him to a world title, it was unbearable. After watching his fighter absorb unnecessary punishment, he made his position clear. It was time to hang up the gloves. When the man who trained Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray Leonard says, "You're done, you're done." After the Holyfield defeat, Thomas disappeared from boxing entirely. For nearly 2 years his name vanished from fight cards. His addiction deepened. His championship money evaporated. When he returned in 1990, the boxing world witnessed his painful transformation. Mike Hunter, Riddick Bowe, Tommy Morrison, names that wouldn't have troubled the prime version of Thomas now. They picked him apart with ease. For boxing insiders who remembered his peak, his crisp jab, his smooth footwork, his devastating right hand, this was impossible to watch. This wasn't just a champion past his prime. This was a fighter whose body had been ravaged by addiction and medical catastrophe. The tragedy deepened as Thomas became exactly what aging fighters fear most: an opponent, the former champion. was now just a guaranteed win for someone else. From world champion to stepping stone was bad enough. But what happened after he hung up his gloves in 1993 makes his in-ring decline look like a warm-up bout. Because 6 years after retirement, with a respectable 43-7-1 record behind him, Thomas wasn't just a forgotten champion. He was dying, and he didn't even know it yet. The knockout blow came in 1999, delivered not by a fighter's fist, but by a doctor's diagnosis. Pinklon Thomas had hepatitis C, a merciless virus, silently ravaging his liver for decades. A grim souvenir from those dirty needles. During his years of drug use, this wasn't just another setback. It was a potential death sentence. When doctors ran tests, they were stunned. His liver count had skyrocketed into the millions, a number so high that medical professionals marveled he was even still breathing. Think about that through those championship fights, those battles with Tyson and Holyfield. A lethal virus had been destroying him from the inside. The doctors didn't sugarcoat it. Thomas was lucky to be alive. The treatment was as brutal as any punishment he'd taken. In the ring, the interferon therapy wasn't gentle. Little pills to swallow with breakfast. These were agonizing injections that left him confronting the wreckage of his choices. Every needle that saved him was a bitter reminder of the needles that nearly killed him for the first time. Thomas couldn't punch, duck, or weave his way out of trouble. This opponent fought dirty, attacking his organs rather than his chin. And unlike those fights, where the final bell eventually rang, this battle stretched on day after day, with no referee to step in when things got too rough. The diagnosis forced him to confront a harsh truth. Remember how we sometimes talk about athletes paying the price for greatness? Well, Thomas was paying now. Not in title losses, not in training camps, but with his health, his future, and everything he had left. All those years of drug abuse had finally sent him an invoice that couldn't be ignored during these darkest hours. Two people proved crucial to whatever chance at survival he still had. His wife, Dawana, showed loyalty rarely seen in boxing stories. She stayed when the money was gone, when the glory had faded, when the man she married was barely hanging on. She refused to throw in the towel when most would have. The grueling treatment gave Thomas endless hours to reflect on what could have been. The championship reign that might have lasted years. Instead of months, the fortune he could have secured. But amid this painful soul-searching came a realization. He still had something to give, even if it wasn't in the ring. "I was lucky to be alive today." He later said that statement was more than words. It was the first real punch Thomas had thrown in years. For perhaps the first time since his championship days, he committed himself to a fight not for money or glory, but for his very existence. While the former champion was battling to save his own life, something unexpected happened. A redemption story, unlike anything boxing had seen before, began taking shape. The same man who once couldn't stay clean long enough to fulfill his potential as champion was about to launch a counter-offensive against addiction that would ultimately touch more lives than any title defense ever could. When the fog of addiction finally cleared, Thomas found himself at a crossroads. His boxing career was over, his championship days a distant memory. But in that moment of clarity, he saw a purpose emerging from his pain. In 1998, he founded Project Pink, which stands for Pride in Neighborhood Kids, an organization with a mission that hit closer to home than any opponent ever had. The mission: keep kids off drugs, give them boxing discipline and hope before addiction had a chance to steal them away. Remember how Thomas once hid in his own neighborhood as a teenager? Now he was returning to similar neighborhoods, not to hide but to stand tall, as both a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope. When a former heavyweight champion walks into a room and tells kids about shooting up between championship bouts, they listen in ways they never would to parents or teachers. For the past 25 years, Thomas has maintained his sobriety while becoming something he never had in his own youth. A mentor at the University Boxing Gym in Melbourne, Florida, he created a sanctuary where troubled teens find more than just boxing techniques. They discover structure, discipline, and most importantly, someone who truly understands their struggles. Without judgment, we have to keep our children away from getting started into drugs and alcohol, and provide the support, guidance, and love they need. He says his words hit harder than any punch, not because of his boxing credentials, but because he lived it. Antonio Tarver, former light heavyweight champion, is living proof of Thomas's impact. He credits him with changing the trajectory of his entire life. That's how legacies are built. One champion creating another, not just in boxing, but in life. What makes Thomas's approach particularly effective is his refusal to sanitize his story. When he travels to schools, youth groups, and community centers, he shares the unfiltered truth. The needle marks, the lost opportunities, the health consequences that haunt him to this day. It's raw, but it's real. And that's why it works. The irony isn't lost on him. The very experiences that nearly destroyed him have become his most valuable asset in connecting with troubled youth. Kids who normally roll their eyes at authority figures lean forward when he speaks, recognizing someone who's walked the path they're considering. At 68 years old, Thomas no longer looks like the imposing figure who once shared the ring with boxing's elite. The years of substance abuse and health battles have taken their toll. But in the eyes of the kids he mentors, he possesses something far more valuable: moral authority earned through suffering and redemption. The foundation he built has guided countless young people toward better paths, transforming a man once known for his self-destruction into a community pillar. And here's the thing: his second act has eclipsed his first, because sometimes life's most meaningful victories don't come with belts. They come long after the final bell has rung. When a boxer enters the Space Coast Sports Hall of Fame, you might expect it to be for his punches, not his purpose. But in 2019, Pinklon Thomas was honored, not for what he did inside the ring, but for what he's done outside of it. That's the true legacy of Pinky Thomas. Not the championship belt he once wore, but the lives he's transformed since hanging up his gloves. You know, most fighters are remembered for their biggest fights, but Thomas will be remembered for his biggest fight of all, the one against himself, the one he finally won. In that victory, he didn't just save himself, he created a blueprint that's saving others. And isn't that worth more than any title could ever be? Pinklon Thomas's story isn't just about boxing. It's about survival, redemption, second chances. So now we turn it over to you. Does Thomas deserve more recognition as a fighter? And more importantly, does his post-boxing impact mean more than the title he once wore? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because we've got more incredible, untold boxing stories coming your way.